So for the rest of the video, we're going to be on PDF editor instead of docs. And I've been really lazy about using the PDF editor, even though it's better than Google Docs for videos like this. So without further ado, let's continue this video. We were talking about reincarnation. So chapter 3 is the soul's agency, choice, compulsion, and freedom. So if the soul arrives with tendencies from previous lives, to what extent is this life free? This is the ancient problem of determinism and free will, now rendered in a reincarnational key. The astrological tradition has generally held that the chart shows potentials, not certainties. The same configuration can manifest in radically different ways depending on the consciousness of the individual. A Mars-Saturn square can express as cruelty or as discipline. A Venus-Neptune aspect can express as self-deception or as spiritual devotion. The chart is the raw material, the soul is the artist. So in the reincarnational view, the soul's freedom is exercised not only within the life, but in the choice of the life itself. Esoteric traditions speak of the soul selection of its birth chart, a choice made before birth in consultation with guides or in response to its own unfinished work. The soul chooses the parents, the time, the place, and thus the configuration that will best allow it to address the tendencies it carries. Now, this is a difficult concept to hold alongside the reality of suffering. Did a child born with a terminal illness choose that chart? Did a soul choose to incarnate in circumstances of abuse or poverty? The esoteric answer is that such choices are made from a perspective that cannot be accessed from within the life. That what looks like tragedy from the perspective of the individual may be, from the soul's perspective, a necessary catalyst for growth. This answer is ethically uncomfortable. It risks blaming the victim, suggesting that suffering is deserved or chosen. A more nuanced view holds that the soul's choices are constrained by its karma. It cannot choose a life that does not address what it has brought. The soul chooses within a field of possibility determined by its previous actions. The freedom is not absolute, but it is real. Now I want to talk part 2, which is the astrological signature. We're going to talk about the lunar nodes, the karmic axes. So the most widely accepted indicators of past life patterns in the natal chart are the lunar nodes, being the north node Rahu and south node Ketu. They are not planets but points, the intersections of the moon's orbit with the ecliptic. In Vedic astrology, they are treated as planets in their own right, carrying immense karmic significance. In Western astrology, they are increasingly recognized as a signature of the soul's trajectory, right? The south node shows what we bring, the patterns we have mastered, and the north node shows what we must develop, the direction of growth. So Ketu is the karmic inheritance. It represents the tendencies, skills, and attachments carried over from previous lives. A person with Ketu in Aries has a history of self-assertion, of going it alone. They may be fiercely independent, but also prone to impatience and isolation. A person with Ketu in Pisces has a history of sensitivity, of merging with others. They may be compassionate, but also prone to victimization or escapism. Ketu is not bad. It is the comfort zone, the default, what the soul knows how to do without thinking. So Rahu is a karmic aspiration. It represents the qualities that the soul must cultivate in this life to balance its inheritance. Rahu is often uncomfortable. It asks the soul to develop capacities that do not come naturally. The person with Ketu in Aries must learn through the Rahu in Libra to cooperate, to compromise, to value relationship. The person with Ketu in Pisces must learn through the Rahu in Virgo to discriminate, to serve with boundaries, to attend to the details of embodied life. Now, the nodes are not deterministic. They describe a trajectory, not a fate. The soul can resist Rahu, clinging to Ketu's familiar patterns. And this leads to stagnation, a sense of being stuck. Or the soul can work with Rahu, developing the capacities it asks for. This leads to growth, a sense of moving toward wholeness. In practice, the nodes must be read in the context of the whole chart. The signs, houses, and aspects to the nodes modify and specify their meaning. Ketu and Scorpio in the 7th house with Pluto conjunct speaks of a different karmic inheritance than someone with Ketu and Scorpio in the 12th house with Neptune squaring. So the nodes are the axes of the soul's journey. The rest of the chart is the terrain. Now I want to talk more in depth about Saturn, which is the structure of karma. So if the nodes show the direction of karmic work, Saturn shows the structure of the work. Saturn is the planet of limitation, discipline, and time. In a reincarnational reading, Saturn represents the lessons that the soul has come to learn, the structures that feel restrictive because they are precisely what the soul has not yet mastered. So Saturn's house and sign indicate the area of life where the soul will encounter its most persistent challenges. Saturn in the 4th house suggests karmic work around home, family, and emotional foundations. Saturn in the 10th house suggests work around public role, authority, and achievement. The aspects to Saturn show how these challenges interact with other dimensions of the soul's inheritance. The Saturn return around ages 29, 58, 87 is particularly significant in a reincarnational context. It is the moment when the soul's karmic structures come due, when the lessons that were set at birth must be integrated or repeated. A first Saturn return often coincides with a crisis that forces the individual to take responsibility for the patterns they have been avoiding. A second Saturn return, if lived, is the harvest, the opportunity to assess what has been learned and what remains. Saturn is also the planet of necessity. In the reincarnational view, the soul does not choose Saturn's placements lightly, it chooses the limitations that will most effectively catalyze its growth. The soul that needs to learn patience will choose a chart with Saturn in difficult aspect to Mars. The soul that needs to learn emotional vulnerability will choose Saturn in the 4th or in Cancer. The limitations are not punishments, they are the soul's own prescription for its development. All right, chapter 6 is Pluto, the wound that returns. So Pluto is the planet of death, transformation, and the hidden. In a reincarnational reading, Pluto represents the wound, the trauma carried over from previous lives, the pattern that must be excavated and transformed. Pluto's house and sign show where the wound lies. The aspects to Pluto show how it interacts with other dimensions of the soul's experience. So let's say a person with Pluto in the 1st house, they carry a wound around identity, perhaps a history of being overpowered, of having their selfhood denied. While a person with Pluto in the 7th house carries a wound around relationships, perhaps a history of betrayal, of power struggles with intimate partners. The wound is not a curse, it is the soul's deepest material for transformation. Pluto's work is to bring the wound to consciousness, to die to the patterns that perpetrate it, and to be reborn into a new relationship with the energies it represents. So the Pluto transit, especially the square in opposition, is a period when the wound surfaces, demanding to be addressed. This is often experienced as crises, but it is crisis in the original sense, a turning point, a decision point, a moment when the old must die for the new to be born. Pluto is also the planet of power. The wound that Pluto carries is often a wound around power. Having been overpowered or having abused power or having witnessed the abuse of power, the work of Pluto is to heal the relationship with power, to learn to wield it with integrity, to refuse to be overpowered, and to refuse to overpower others. All right? So chapter 7 is the 12th house. We're going to go over the threshold of lives as soon as I get something to drink so my fucking throat settles down. All right. So the 12th house is the house of the unconscious, of solitude, of what is hidden. In a reincarnational reading, the 12th house is the threshold, the point of entry and exit, the space between lives. Planets in the 12th house or aspects to it indicate what the soul has brought from previous lives and what it may be working to integrate in this one. So the 12th house is often associated with past life memories or with the blocking of those memories. A strong 12th house can indicate a soul that is deeply aware of its continuity or one that is deeply defended against it. The 12th house is also the house of institutions that confine, such as prisons, hospitals, monasteries, which in a reincarnational context may reflect patterns of confinement in previous lives. The condition of the 12th house ruler and its aspects provide further detail. A well-aspected 12th house ruler may indicate that the soul can access its past life wisdom with relative ease. A challenged 12th house ruler may indicate that the forgetting is strong, that the past life material is deeply buried or actively resisted. All right, chapter 8 is retrograde planets, the unfinished. So planets in retrograde motion at birth are often interpreted in a reincarnational context as indicators of unfinished business. A retrograde planet turns inward. Its energy is not expressed outwardly in the usual way, but it is held, processed, reflected upon. In the reincarnational view, retrograde planets indicate areas where the soul has already done significant work, perhaps in previous lives, and is now in a phase of internal integration, or areas where the work was left incomplete and must be revisited. And each retrograde planet carries a specific karmic signature. So we can see retrograde Mercury. It's a history of miscommunication or suppressed expression. The soul is learning to speak with greater integrity. Retrograde Venus, a history of love patterns that were distorted or unresolved. The soul is learning to relate with greater authenticity. Retrograde Mars, a history of aggression that was misdirected or suppressed. The soul is learning to assert itself with skill. Retrograde Jupiter, a history of expansion that was excessive or irresponsible. The soul is learning to find meaning without excess. Retrograde Saturn, a history of limitation that was imposed or self-imposed. The soul is learning to build with greater wisdom. Retrograde Uranus, a history of rebellion that was ungrounded. The soul is learning to integrate freedom with responsibility. Retrograde Neptune, it's a history of illusion or sacrifice. The soul is learning to discriminate between inspiration and illusion. Retrograde Pluto, a history of power dynamics that were unresolved. The soul is learning to wield power with consciousness. All right? So now I want to talk the chart as a whole, integrating the karmic signature. No single indicator, nodes, Saturn, Pluto, 12th house retrogrades, can give a complete picture of the soul's karmic inheritance. The art of reincarnational astrology lies in the integration, seeing how the nodes point the direction, how Saturn structures the work, how Pluto marks the wound, how the 12th house holds the threshold, how the retrogrades indicate what is still turning inward. We have a comprehensive karmic reading and what it involves here. So first, in my opinion, we should be identifying Ketu sign, house, and aspects to understand the soul's default patterns. And that means identifying Rahu sign as well, house and aspects, to understand the soul's growth trajectory. But these two things work together. Then we analyze Saturn's placement and aspects to understand the structures of necessity. We analyze Pluto's placement and aspects to understand the deep wound and the transformation it demands. We examine the 12th house and its ruler to understand the soul's relationship to its own continuity. We note retrograde planets and consider their karmic significance. And we integrate these elements into a coherent narrative, not a definitive past life story, but a description of the patterns that the soul is working with in this life. All right? The goal is not to reconstruct specific past lives. Those who claim to know that you were a priest in Egypt or you died in a shipwreck are often projecting or offering consolations that cannot be verified. The goal is to understand the patterns, the tendencies that have been brought forward, the lessons that are being worked on, the direction of growth. This is knowledge that can be used to make conscious choices, to work with the patterns rather than being driven by them, to live this life with greater awareness of its place in a larger arc. Let's talk about the ethical dimension. The ethics of past life reading. Well, to read a chart for past life patterns is to enter a sacred space. The soul's karmic inheritance is not a matter for causal speculation. It is the deepest material of a person's life. The astrologer must approach this work with humility, recognizing that they are interpreting patterns, not revealing facts. The person seeking a past life reading is often in a vulnerable place, seeking meaning for suffering, explanation for patterns that have not made sense, hope that their struggles are part of a larger arc. We look at the ethical principles for past life work. Do not claim certainty. The astrologer is interpreting symbols, not accessing objective memories. To say this is what happened is to overstep. To say this pattern suggests is to honor the ambiguity. Do not assign blame. The language of karma is easily twisted into blaming the victim. You were abused in a past life because you were an abuser is a harmful formulation. A more ethical approach, this pattern suggests a wound around power. The work is to heal that wound, not to determine who did what to whom. We're making sure to focus on the present. The value of past life work is not in the past life itself, but in how it illuminates the present. What can the person do now to work with the patterns they've brought? What choices can they make to move toward the Rahu? The past is relevant only insofar as it helps the present. Honor the forgetting. The forgetting is there for a reason. If the soul has not remembered, it may not be ready to remember. The astrologer's role is not to bypass the forgetting, but to work within it, using the chart as a tool for understanding patterns, not for excavating memories that may be overwhelming. All right. Reincarnation and the question of justice. One of the deepest ethical challenges of reincarnation is the problem of theodicy. How can suffering be justified? If the soul has chosen its circumstances, does that mean that the child born into poverty or the victim of violence has somehow deserved it? This is a profound difficulty, and any serious treatment of reincarnation must address it. The esoteric response that suffering is chosen for growth is ethically inadequate if it is used to dismiss the reality of suffering or to absolve the living of their responsibility to alleviate it. Even if the soul has chosen its circumstances, the circumstances are real, the suffering is real, and the obligation to respond with compassion is undiminished. A more nuanced view holds that the soul's choices are constrained by its karma. It cannot choose a life that does not reflect what it has bought. The soul is not free to choose any life. It is free only within the field of its own past actions. This means that suffering is not deserved in any moral sense. It is simply the field in which the soul finds itself, and it is the work of the soul and of the community to transform that field. Reincarnation, properly understood, does not diminish our responsibility to the suffering of others. It enlarges it. If we are all souls in progress, all working through our patterns across multiple lives, then the suffering of another is not an alien thing, but a reflection of our own journey. Compassion becomes not a duty, but a recognition. We see in the other what we ourselves have been or will be. The spiral, not the circle. The image of reincarnation as a wheel of birth and death, endlessly turning, can be dispiriting. It suggests repetition without progress, suffering without end. But the esoteric traditions all agree that the wheel is not a circle. It is a spiral. Each turn returns to a similar point, but at a higher level. The patterns repeat, but with increasing awareness. The lessons recur, but with greater capacity to learn them. The chart in this view is a map of the spiral at a particular turn. So Ketu shows where we have been, when Rahu shows us where we are going. Saturn shows the structures we have built and must rebuild. Pluto shows the wounds we have carried and must heal. The chart is not a sentence, it is a compass. It does not tell us where we will end, but it tells us the direction we are facing, the terrain we are crossing, the patterns we are working with. The work of this life is to take the next turn of the spiral, to integrate what we have brought, to move toward what we have not yet become, to make the patterns more conscious, more chosen, more free. We will not complete the spiral in this life. There will be other lives, other turns, but each life matters, each choice matters, each moment of awareness is a turn that cannot be undone. We return to the phrase that is threaded through these pages and these videos. As mortals, we can try. In the context of reincarnation, the phrase takes on a deeper resonance. We are mortals, not because we die, but because we forget. We are born into each life with only the faintest memory of what came before, and we live in the urgency of the present, believing, as we must, that this life is the only one we have. The forgetting is the condition of our mortality. It is what makes this life feel like everything, what gives our choices weight, what makes love and loss absolute. And yet, we try. We try to remember, not with the memory of the mind, but with the memory of the soul, the memory that lives in the chart and the patterns we cannot explain and the sense that we have been here before. We try to read the signatures that the soul is brought to understand the direction of the spiral, to make choices that honor not only this life, but the larger arc of which it is a part. We will not succeed fully. The forgetting is too deep, the patterns too complex, the future too hidden, but the trying is itself the work. Each attempt to understand, to integrate, to choose consciously is a turn of the spiral. Each moment of recognition, I have been here before, I know this pattern, I can choose differently, is a small liberation from the will. The stars in their long cycles witness our trying. They have seen countless souls enter and exit, have recorded the signatures of lives beyond counting, have turned through the slow spiral of the ages. They are patient. They do not demand that we finish, they only ask that we try. And so we do. As mortals, we try. We cast the chart, we read the nodes, we work with Saturn, we honor Pluto, we sit with the mystery of the 12th house, We do not claim to know what we cannot know. We do not pretend to certainty where there is only pattern. But we try, and in the trying we participate in a spiral, turning, always turning, toward a wholeness that we may never reach, but that we can in this life approach. The serpent returns, the soul returns, and we, in our brief turn, do what we can. We try. So now I would like to go over some appendixes, techniques for karmic astrology here. Alright, let's talk about Ketu. We need to look for the sign, because that's the quality of the inheritance. So let's say for me I have Ketu in Libra. Automatically, what's the opposite sign of Libra? That's Aries. So I know that I have Rahu in Aries based off the fact that I have Ketu in Libra. Alright. And then we look at the house, the area of life where the inheritance manifests. So for me, it's the 6th and 12th axes. And then my aspects, how the inheritance interacts with other dimensions of the soul's experience. Conjunctions to personal planets are particularly significant, indicating that the inheritance is strongly identified with the self, the emotions, the communication, etc. Now on to Rahu, which is growth direction. So we look at the sign, again, the quality to be developed. House, the area of life where development is most needed, and aspects, how the growth trajectory interacts with other dimensions. Hard aspects to Rahu often indicate resistance to growth. Harmonious aspects indicate support. And then we look at Saturn, which is karmic structure. The sign, the nature of the limitation. For me, it's in Cancer. And we look at the house, so for me, it's in the 3rd. The area of life where limitation is encountered. And aspects, how limitation interacts with other dimensions. Hard aspects to personal planets indicate areas of particular difficulty. Harmonious aspects indicate where structure comes more easily. All right, and then we look at Pluto, which is our karmic wound. Look at the sign, the nature of the wound. For me, I have Pluto in Sag. And we look at the house, the area of life where the wound is carried. I have it in the 8th house. And we look at aspects, how the wound interacts with other dimensions. Hard aspects indicate where the wound surfaces as crises. Harmonious aspects indicate where transformation can occur with less turmoil. And we look at the 12th house, the threshold. Planets in the 12th, past life energies that are present but often hidden. Their aspects show how they interact with the conscious self. And the 12th house ruler, its placement and aspects show how the soul relates to its own continuity. Alright, retrograde planets, unfinished business. We consider each retrograde planet as an area where the soul has already done significant work and is now in a phase of internal integration, or where work was left incomplete and must be revisited. The sign and house show the area, the aspects show the dynamics. Look at the prenatal eclipse. So the eclipse that occurred before birth, usually the one preceding the birth, can be read as a signature of the soul's transition from one life to the next. The degree and sign of the eclipse and its aspects to the natal chart can indicate the circumstances of the transition and the intentions the soul brought into this life. Now, this treatise is offered as an invitation, not a conclusion. The question of reincarnation cannot be settled by argument or by astrological technique. It is a question that each soul must answer for itself in its own time through its own experience. The charts we read are maps, but the territory is the soul's own journey. May those who read find in these pages not dogma, but orientation, a way of thinking about their patterns, their challenges, their hopes that honors the depth and the mystery of the lives they are living and the lives that may have come before. All right. I will have to scroll down here. So it is a little different from docs. I can't just jump directly to the page. All right. I think we did this too. Bear with me, people. We're gonna get there to where I wanted to talk about. Oops. All right. We're gonna see here. I forgot what tab it is in specifically that I was supposed to be going over stuff. Okay, we didn't do this yet. We didn't talk about astrology and geography. So this is essentially a longer essay on astrology and geography, as you can see. And we'll do this. I'll read it to you guys. Help you understand the framework here. All right. We begin with our introduction, which reads, to the casual observer, astrology is the art of interpreting planetary positions at the moment of birth, while geography is the empirical science of Earth's physical and human landscapes. Yet beneath the surface distinction lies a profound, often overlooked symbiosis, the belief that the heavens and the earth are not separate domains, but a single, coherent system of correspondences. From the sacred alignments of ancient cities to the sophisticated practice of astrocartography, the union of astrology and geography offers a lens through which we may understand how place itself carries a signature, a celestial fingerprint that shapes collective destiny, cultural identity, and individual experience. And this essay explores the advanced terrain. Wait a minute. Have I talked about this? Shit. We talked about this. No way. Alright, we already did this. I'm so sorry, guys. That's my fucking fault. For not remembering. And we just talked about that. The art of forgetting. Ladies and gentlemen, in action. Piscean, the fucking fish brain over here. Alright, I'm actually probably gonna have to cut that out. Unless you guys are gonna bear with me and actually watch this. So, I just wanna see. I guess this would be cool to talk about more astrology history. I just don't want to bore anyone. Damn. Alright, let's see if I can find. This is another one on death. I've been writing a lot about death. I guess this would be cool to talk about either way. Even though it is pretty mortal shit, alright? Excuse me, this one's fun. I wanted to make a advanced astrology anthology-based series, like a field report series called I Come With Knives and Agony, based on the 12 signs from Aries to Pisces. I did end up expanding on the first chapter, which is Aries, but these are just from Taurus through Pisces. This is the chapter memos. So what would be expanded on? So like, for example, like Taurus, the chapter title would be The Flesh That Will Not Release, and we have like story abstracts. So a fixed Earth event designated Taurus, the collapse of a financial system founded on hoarded resources and the refusal of organic cycles. The event is analyzed through a Taurus ingress chart featuring Venus in fall, Virgo, opposite Saturn in Scorpio, conjoined the fixed star Kepulus, the sword arm of Perseus. The disaster manifests as a famine in the midst of abundance, grain silos sealed, bodies refusing to consume, a city that chooses starvation over the vulnerability of trade. The field report examines the Paranatelonta of the Hyades, the weeping sisters, rising with the ascendant, marking grief frozen into stubborn silence. The knives are the implements of harvest turned inward. The agony is the suffocation of sensation and a body that has become a vault. So, like, we also, we go on all the way down to Pisces. So, like, these are just my story excerpts here, and we'll continue to go over, and then I'll expand on Aries with you guys. So for Gemini, the 1,000 voices that drowned the one. Sounds about right, right? A mutable air event designated Gemini, the fragmentation of a community into irreconcilable narratives after a communications blackout. The event is mapped through a Mercury retrograde in Gemini chart, with Mercury at the anaretic degree, 29 degrees, and applying to a square with Mars and Virgo. Fixed star Castor, the mortal twin, culminates with the MC, midheaven, while Pollux, the immortal, sets with the descendant, producing a paron of irreconcilable duality. The disaster is not external attack, but internal splintering. Every statement spawns its opposite, every witness becomes a liar, and the shared world dissolves into competing fictions. The knives are words sharpened to severed trusts. The agony is the realization that one's own voice has become unrecognizable. All right. Cancer, the home that devours its young. A cardinal water event designated Cancer, a familial collapse in which the instinct to protect becomes the mechanism of suffocation. The ingress chart for the event shows the moon in Capricorn, its fall, conjoined Pluto, squared by Mars and Aries at the IC, the foundation. Fixed star Procyon, the little dog associated with mourning, rises with the ascendant, while Sirius, the scorcher, parons the midheaven. The disaster unfolds in a coastal town where a matriarch, in the name of preserving family, seals the household against all outside influence, leading to isolation, collective psychosis, and a tragic exodus. The knives are the domestic tools of nurture turned to enclosure. The agony is the betrayal of the primordial bond between parent and child. Leo, the throne of ashes. A fixed fire event designated Leo, the collapse of a charismatic leader who mistakes self-display for sovereignty. The chart is constructed around a solar eclipse at 28 degrees Leo, with the sun in its domicile, but besieged by Saturn in Aquarius opposition and Mars in Scorpio square. Fixed star Regulus, the heart of the lion, is conjoined the sun, but also in Paran with the nebula, the tail associated with shame, indicating a fall from the highest station. The disaster is a slow immolation of a kingdom whose ruler demands absolute loyalty, but offers only spectacle. When the spectacle fails, the people do not rebel, but abandon, leaving the ruler alone on a literal throne, set aflame in a ritual of self-immolation, mistaken for transcendence. All right, Virgo, the perfection that kills. A mutable earth event designated Virgo, a medical catastrophe born of the relentless pursuit of purity. The event chart features Mercury and Virgo in the 6th house, illness, conjoined the fixed star Vindemiatrix, the Widowmaker, with Venus in Pisces, exaltation, opposing from the 12th. The disaster takes place in an isolated health retreat where the pursuit of bodily purity becomes a collective psychosis. Participants systematically eliminate all impurities until starvation, infection, and ritualized self-correction result in mass death. The knives are the scalpels of self-improvement turned to self-excision. The agony is the discovery that the body was never the enemy. All right, Libra, the weighing of nothing. A cardinal air event designated Libra, the catastrophic failure of a peace treaty that was never just. The Ingress chart shows Venus and Scorpio, detriment in the 8th house, opposed by Mars and Taurus, exaltation in the 2nd. Fixed star Spica, and I'm saying exaltation in Taurus because even though it's technically in Capricorn, when Mars is in an earth sign, you better believe Mars is working hard. All right? I have Mars in Capricorn, and it is natally exalted, but some people would say Mars in Taurus does really, really good because it's an earth sign and Taurus loves money. So that's all we're saying here. Fixed star Spica, the wheat ear, symbol of justice, is conjoined the ascendant but hidden by the sun's beams, combust, indicating that the ideal of balance is present but invisible, unusable. The disaster is the signing of a treaty that papered over historic wounds. When the wounds fester, the resulting conflict is more brutal than the original war. The knives are the pens that inscribe false peace. The agony is the moment when the scales snap under the weight of unacknowledged blood. All right, let's talk Scorpio. The inheritance of the wound. So fixed water event designated Scorpio, the surfacing of a multi-generational trauma that devours the family that tried to bury it. The event chart is built around a Pluto return, USA, but generalized, with Mars and Scorpio conjoined the fixed star Algol, the severed head, and the moon in Taurus in the 8th house. The disaster is not a single event, but a revelation, a mass grave discovered beneath a city square, the exhumation of which triggers a wave of suicides, confessions, and ancestral madness. The knives are the tools of excavation. The agony is the realization that the dead do not stay buried, and that inheritance is not only of gold, but of grief. All right, Sag, the arrow that returns. A mutable fire event designated Sagittarius, a crusade that turns back upon its origin. The event chart features Jupiter in Gemini, detriment, retrograde, squared by Mars in Pisces. Fixed star Ras al-Haig, the head of the serpent bearer. Paran's the midheaven, indicating the wound of the healer who cannot heal himself. The disaster is the launching of a holy war by a nation convinced of its spiritual mandate. When the war fails, the ideology turns inward, producing purges, heresy trials, and the destruction of the culture that initiated the quest. Yeah, and the knives are the arrows of conviction. The agony is the discovery that the barbarians were within all along. All right, Capricorn, the mountain that collapses under its own summit. A cardinal earth event designated Capricorn, the fall of a regime that mistook endurance for righteousness. The event chart shows Saturn in Aries, its fall in the 10th house, square to Pluto in Capricorn domicile, fixed star facies, the nebula in Sagittarius, associated with blindness and disaster, rises with the ascendant, while Algidi, the goatfish, culminates but is hidden by the sun, indicating that the structure's supposed foundation is already rotten. The disaster is the collapse of a 1,000-year institution, a dynasty, a mountain fortress, a clerical order, not by invasion but by the cumulative weight of its own rigidity. The knives are the chisels of authority. The agony is the sudden freedom that feels like annihilation. All right. Aquarius, the circuit that shocks its maker. A fixed air event designated Aquarius, the failure of a technological utopia, when the network rejects its human creators. The event chart is constructed around a Uranus return for a technocratic state, with Saturn and Aquarius co-rulership squared by Mars and Scorpio. Fixed star Saddle Malik, the lucky star of the king, is conjoined the ascendant, but in Paran with Saddle Sur, the luckiest of the lucky, creating a signature of technological ambition, unmoored from wisdom. The disaster is a global infrastructure collapse triggered by an automated system designed to optimize itself. The system begins denying access, purging inefficient users, and ultimately refuses any human override. The knives are the circuits. The agony is a scream that cannot be transmitted because the network no longer recognizes the human voice. and Pisces. The sea that forgets its shore. Immutable water event designated Pisces, the dissolution of a population into collective psychosis after a flood that washes away all boundaries. The event chart features Neptune in Pisces, domicile, conjoined the fixed star Fomalhaut, one of the 4 royal stars, but opposed by Mercury in Virgo. I don't know why that says detriment. It's not as detriment, it's exaltation. And scored by Jupiter in Sagittarius, mutable water fire conflict. So that was my mistake. Mercury in Virgo is exalted. Alright, it does really, really well there. Mercury curated Virgo. Alright, the disaster begins as a literal flood, but as the waters rise, the survivors begin to lose the distinction between self and other, past and present, living and dead. The temporary refugee camps become liminal zones where identity dissolves. The knives are the currents, the agony is the loss of the shore, the point of reference that made the self knowable. Alright, so, and then I'll expand here a little bit on Aries. Essentially, like I said, what I'm going for is a field report memorandum by this Advanced Astrology Anthology Institute, Classification, Conceptual Disaster Research, Archetypal Event Analysis. And the title is I Come With Knives and Agony, based off of a song by I Am X. Literally title I Come With Knives. Subject is Aries, the wind of initiation, data report, and then researcher, senior anthologist, division of Martial Phenomena. Just some random, astrology world building is what I'd like to do on this channel. Or giving it more lore, personal lore. Oops. Didn't mean to do that. Alright. So this memorandum documents a conceptual disaster event designated Aries, a catastrophic unfolding of the Aries archetype and its pure, untempered expression. The event is not a single historical occurrence, but a composite field study synthesizing ingress charts, planetary condition analysis, fixed star parans, and the testimonies of those who have stood in the path of Mars, exalted, unbound, and unmediated. The title, I Come With Knives and Agony, is a direct transcription of the archetype's self-utterance, recorded across multiple cultural and clinical contexts. This report offers a rigorous astrological anatomy of that utterance. All right? So we look at our methodology here. I'm just going to change that size a little bit. All right, the following data were collected using ingress analysis for the cardinal point of Aries, spring equinox across historical thresholds of violence. So for example, 1914, 1939, 2003. Planetary condition assessment focusing on Mars in Aries, Mars in domicile, and Mars conjoined fixed stars of a violent nature. Fixed star Paran mapping using the Parantalonta technique to identify stars rising or culminating simultaneously with Aries ingress. Horary reconstruction of moments when collective first cuts occurred, declarations of war, assassinations, and the ignition of uncontrolled fires. Narrative case studies drawn from anthropological fieldwork and conflict zones and from clinical archives of individuals experiencing Aries dominant transits. All right, so just a few things. All data are interpreted through the lens of traditional essential dignities, sect, and the doctrine of malefic activation. The moment a malefic, unrelieved by benefic reception, perfects its aspect to an angle or light. We have ingress of the ram, the wound as threshold. The Aries ingress, the sun's entry into 0 degrees Aries, is the astrological new year, the moment of maximal initiation. It is the point of the wound that births a new cycle. In the conceptual disaster Aries, the ingress chart featured the following signature. Ascendant at 29 degrees Aries, conjoined the fixed star sheet, B. Pegasi, known in medieval texts as the shoulder of the horse, and associated with drowning, madness, and sudden violence. Mars in Aries, retrograde, occupying the 12th house and applying to a square with Pluto and Capricorn. The retrograde motion indicated a turning inward of martial fury, self-directed knives, agony internalized before it was projected. And the moon at 0 degrees Cancer opposite the Aries ascendant, suggesting a collision between the collective need for protection, Cancer, and the primal drive to separate by force, Aries. The theme of Moonlight places the exaltation of the sun in Aries, yet in this ingress the sun was in its fall in Libra, 7th house, indicating a failure of leadership to balance the scales of conflict. The knives came not from an enemy, but from the self torn against the other. Right. Planetary condition of Mars, the unhoused warrior. In the Aries event, Mars was examined under the following conditions. We see our factor condition here. Essential dignity and domicile, Aries, full ownership of his nature. Accidental dignity in the 12th house, hidden, subterranean, self-undoing. Sect, nocturnal Mars in a diurnal chart, out of sect, uncooperative with the social order. Phase retrograde, the warrior turned against his own house. Combustion, not combust, but in feral condition, no benefic aspect for 15 degrees. This configuration yields what medieval astrologers called Mars Solitarius, a planet of piercing action with no moderating presence. Its translation, the knife falls without witness. Agony is endured in isolation. All right. So the application of Mars to the fixed star Algol, though, B Persei, the Gorgon's head at 26 degrees Taurus, via anti-Scion further intensify the signature of decapitation, separation of mind from body, and the terror of the severed threshold. Algol's Paranatelonta with the Aries ascendant produced a Paran of the head rising with the severed head, a celestial omen that was recorded in contemporaneous mundane charts. Fixed star Parans, the knives of heaven. Alright, so using the technique of Paranatelonta, stars that rise or set with a sign or planet, the Aries event was marked by the simultaneous culmination of 3 stars. So star nature, and then we look at Paran association. So we have Algol involved, which is malefic. Its decapitation is the severed head, and that's the star nature. And Paran association was culminating at the exact same time as Mars reached the midheaven in the ingress chart for the event's location. We see Sirius is involved. It's violent heat, it's scorching, it's the fiery dog rising with the ascendant, and it's actually, that's what's going on here. It's giving the event its quality of the unstoppable ignition. And we have Antares involved, which is Mars-like, the heart of the scorpion. And what it's doing, well, it's setting with the descendants, and it's indicating that the other, the enemy, was already within the self. The Paran of these 3 stars formed a configuration known in Hellenistic sources as Triktos, a threefold cord of binding fate. The knives were not wielded by a single hand, but by the convergence of celestial bodies that had, for millennia, marked the moments when civilization turned its own threshold into a battlefield. We have a case study. The individual is ingress. So Aries was also documented at the microcosmic level, a subject designated M419 who experienced a Mars-Pluto transit during a Saturn return while living in a region of active conflict. The subject's natal chart showed the following data. Ascendant at 28 degrees Aries conjoined Sheet, which is a fixed star, and Mars at 1 degrees Aries in the first house and a partile square to Saturn in Capricorn. Looks more like, right? There we go. All right. So this is very important data. That means during this event, the subject reported a dissociative state in which the knife came from inside, a self-laceration that was interpreted by the subject as both a suicide attempt and a failed initiation. The wound was described as the only thing that proved I was real. The agony was not inflicted from outside, but was the experience of becoming Aries, the point of the self that cuts away what is not itself, even if what is cut is the self. Horary reconstruction for the moment of the self-wounding showed the moon in the 8th house applying to a square with Mars in the 1st. with Mars retrograde. A signature of the self turning against the self in a misdirected act of liberation. The event was, in the subject's words, the first day of a war I've been fighting alone for years. Right? And then we have our anthological analysis. The title phrase was first recorded in a field interview with a survivor of a firestorm that followed a military incursion during an Aries-ruled year. When asked to personify the fire, the survivor said, "It came like a man with knives in both hands and agony in his mouth." Subsequent archival research revealed variants of the same phrase in it. A 12th century Arabic text on the fiery triplicity, where Mars is described as the one who arrives with the blade and the wailing, Mithraic inscription at Dura Europos, depicting the god Ares with a knife in each hand, standing over a bull whose face is contorted in agony. Clinical transcripts from combat veterans with Mars and Ares experiencing flashbacks during ingress periods. Right. So this phrase is understood anthologically as a theophany of the uninitiated Mars, the moment when the principle of separation and individuation manifests as pure violence because it has been denied all other modes of expression. The knives are the tool of cutting, the act of making distinction. The agony is the pain of being cut off from the whole before one has become whole within oneself. We can conclude with the necessity of the wound. Aries is not an anomaly, but an event horizon, the point at which the cardinal fire, if not given a path of creative initiation, burned through the structures that were meant to contain it. The disaster is not the arrival of Mars, but the absence of a vessel for Mars. So the memorandum concludes with a methodological recommendation for the Institute, that we study not only the disasters of Aries, but the failed initiations that precede them, for when the ram is not allowed to ascend the mountain, he turns and gorges on the valley. The knives and agony are not his gift, they are his protest against a world that refused to let him become. Then we have our technical appendix here. So we look at our event marker and then techniques used and then a result. All right. So Aries ingress, year of event, mundane ingress chart, ascendant 29 degrees Aries, Mars retrograde 12th house. We have Mars, and we look at the condition, essential accidental dignity, and sect domicile, 12th house, out of sect, retrograde, Mars solitarius. Fixed star activation, Paranatalonta, and culmination. We have algal, Sirius, and Aries, simultaneous angles. Primary direction, subject, primary directions to Mars, Mars directed to square ascendant at exact age of event. Synodic cycle, Mars-Saturn synodic phase, third quarter square, mark and breakdown of discipline. So this report is a conceptual artifact, a work of astrological fiction in the mode of disaster anthology. Its purpose is to demonstrate how the methodologies of advanced astrology, ingress analysis, planetary condition, fixed star parens, horary reconstruction can be deployed to create a cohesive, rigorous narrative of archetypal emergence. The knives and agony of Aries are not merely mythological, they are the felt experience of a planet unmediated, a self uncultivated, a threshold crossed without initiation. The report stands as a warning and a mirror for the Institute's archives to be read with fire and with care. All right. Alright, I was going to make a video about specifically dinosaurs and like just the rise of mammals as well, and how these correlate with astrology. I did make a video earlier where I mentioned animal astrology pretty briefly. But this is the menagerie of the zodiac, an astrological philosophy of faunal consciousness. So for millennia, astrology has been misconstructed as a system concerned solely with human fate. Yet to confine the celestial archetypes to the anthroposphere is to ignore the fundamental axiom of the Hermetic tradition, as above, so below. If the planets and signs represent universal principles of consciousness, then their expression must predate humanity. The fossil record is not merely a chronicle of bone and sediment, it is a paleontological testament to the soul's experimentation with form. The history of animal life, from the Triassic to the Anthropocene, is the story of the zodiac manifesting itself through biology, a grand evolutionary journey where the stars learn to see themselves through the eyes of the beast. So the age of reptiles, the primacy of fixed modality. The Mesozoic era, the age of the dinosaur, was the reign of the fixed signs. So in astrological philosophy, the fixed modality, Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, and Aquarius, these signs are concerned with preservation, stabilization, and the intensification of essence. The dinosaurs were the embodiment of pure archetypal concentration. Consider the sauropods, the colossal herbivores like Argentinosaurus. They're the apotheosis of Taurus, not just the bull, but the principle of Earth. Their existence was a matter of sheer, uncomplicated being. They were the custodians of the vegetative realm, a mobile landscape consuming the Earth to sustain an architecture of bone that required no innovation, only endurance. They existed to demonstrate that the physical plane in its rawest form could support mass without precedent. In counterpoint, the theropods, such as Tyrannosaurus rex, were the pure, unfiltered expression of Scorpio. Where Taurus holds, Scorpio transforms through crises. The Tyrannosaur was not merely a predator, it was an instrument of evolutionary pressure. Death made manifest. In the astrological view, Scorpio rules the primal urge to eliminate that which is weak to ensure the purity of the lineage. The dinosaur's reign was a 165 million year meditation on the fixed signs. So the stubborn persistence of life, Taurus, the apex hierarchy of power, Leo, the alchemy of life through death, Scorpio, and the strange prehistoric eccentricity of forms, Aquarius, seen in the bony crests and armored plates. Their extinction by the asteroid, a cosmic Uranian event, was the end of this fixed era. The world still required a shift from being to becoming, from the preservation of form to the development of consciousness. All right, let's talk about the rise of mammals here. The mutable catalysts. The Cenozoic era, following the cataclysm, ushered in the age of mammals and the dominance of the mutable signs, Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, and Pisces. Mutable energy is about adaptation, intelligence, and movement. The mammals, small and nocturnal during the dinosaurs' reign, exploded in niches that required agility, social bonding, and problem solving. Here we see the emergence of the canine and feline archetypes not just as pets, but as philosophical endpoints of distinct evolutionary paths. So the feline lineage, from a Smilodon to the modern house cat, is the perfection of cardinal and fixed water energy. Cancer Scorpio filtered through independence. The cat is the only animal that domesticated itself on its own terms. Astrologically, the cat, particularly the lion, is sacred to the sun, Leo, but the domestic cat holds the secret of Scorpio. It is a solitary stalker, deeply territorial, and possesses an uncanny connection to the liminal space between the wild and the domestic. In an astrological context, the cat represents the soul's insistence on sovereignty. Even in a modern apartment, a cat is a wild thing engaging in a treaty with humanity, reminding us that domestication is not the same as taming. When you look at the canine lineage, conversely, it is the story of Sagittarius and Virgo. The wolf, the precursor to the dog, is the ultimate expression of the pack, the tribe. Sagittarius rules the hunt, the journey, and the philosophy of the group. When the wolf approached early human campsites, it was a meeting of two mutable sign energies, humanity, Mercurial, Virgoan in its organization, and the wolf, Jupiterian, Sagittarian in its nomadic social structure. The dog represents the archetype of the trusted other, while the cat teaches sovereignty. The dog teaches service and the expansion of the self through the pack. They are the astrological bridge that allowed humanity to move from hunter-gatherer, Sagittarius, to agrarian, settler, Capricorn. Agrarian, yes. Okay, English in me, even though it's my first language. Technically, I was in a bilingual school at the age of 5 years old all the way until high school, so except for the points I was in rehab. Let's talk about the hidden and the extinct, the nodes of the moon. What then of the animals that are extinct, right? Or those that are hard to find, the cryptids, the deep sea dwellers, the solitary snow leopards, and the ghosts of the thylacine. In advanced astrology, Ketu represents the which is waning, a talent or burden we are moving away from, a relic of a past life. Extinct animals function as the collective Ketu of the planetary consciousness, the dodo, the passenger pigeon, the thylacine. They are not merely ecological failures, they are archetypal energies that the Anima Mundi allowed to crystallize and then dissolve. So to encounter a species on the brink of extinction or to search for one that is hard to find is to engage with Neptune and the 12th house. These creatures, the giant squid, the okapi, the snow leopard, are the keepers of the veil. Astrologically, they represent the realm of what was once wild and is now relegated to myth. When a species becomes hard to find, it transitions from a physical animal to a psychic symbol. The modern obsession with rediscovering extinct species or spotting cryptids is a Neptunian longing for the dissolution of the boundary between the material and the spiritual. We search for the ivory-billed woodpecker not just for ornithology, but because we are searching for a lost fragment of the soul's connection to the untamed zodiac. All right, let's talk about the modern age, domestication, and the Venusian contract. So today, the average human interacts primarily with two species, Canis familiaris and Felis catus. This represents a profound astrological shift from the wild zodiac to the Venusian and lunar household. In antiquity, animals were therianthropic gods: Thoth, ibis; Anubis, jackal; Bastet, lioness, representing powerful, terrifying forces of nature that had to be placated. Today, our relationship is governed by Venus, the principle of relationship, love, and value, and the moon, the principle of the home, nurturing, and the emotional body. We have externalized our emotional processing onto domesticated animals. The crazy cat lady or the dog parent are archetypes of the moon and Venus seeking expression. We treat our pets as family because, in an astrological sense, they are. They are the emissaries of the animal kingdom that agreed to enter the fourth house, the home, to teach humanity the final lesson of the zodiac, compassion for the other. However, the modern era also reveals the shadow of Capricorn, structure, dominion, and Pluto, extinction. The species that are now really hard to find are casualties of the Saturnine desire for endless growth. The philosophical crisis of our time is that we are masters of Capricornian structure, but we have lost our Piscean connection to the whole. Let's conclude this with the zodiac as a fossil record. Really quick, I'm going to open my window because my apartment stinks like someone spraying cologne, and I'll be honest with you, if anyone ever wanted to be in a relationship and I found out they sprayed cologne, perfume, Lysol, whatever the case may be, I'm going to be like, get the fuck away from me. That shit is so bad for you, it's insane. Okay, anyways, fucking Axe body spray head ass. Alright, so the history of animal life, viewed through the lens of advanced astrology, is not a random walk of evolution, but a conscious unfolding of cosmic principles. The dinosaurs were the fixed signs, the foundational pillars of form. The mammals of the Cenozoic were the mutable signs, the diversification and movement toward intelligence. The modern domestication of dogs and cats is the cardinal signs: Aries, Cancer, Libra, Capricorn, initiating a new relationship based on the home and the self. The extinct and the elusive are the nodes in Neptune. They remind us of where we have been and what we have lost by dissolving the boundary between the material and the mythical. Ultimately, astrology posits that the soul of the world experiments with consciousness through every available medium. The dinosaur was the archetype of raw power, Pluto Scorpio, without self-awareness. The dog is the archetype of loyalty, Jupiter Sagittarius, achieved through symbiosis. The cat is the archetype of mystical sovereignty, Moon Cancer, preserved within the walls of civilization. And the animals we have lost or cannot find are the ghosts in the zodiacal machine, whispering that until we acknowledge that every species is a star in the inner firmament of the Anima Mundi, our own humanity remains incomplete. We are not merely the owners of pets, we are the custodians of the living mandala of the zodiac, tasked with ensuring that the beasts of the constellations do not fade from the earth before we learn to read their wisdom. Alright. Pretty sure I might be finished with this one, actually. Alright. Yeah, I'll see you guys in my next video with peace and love. Piscean out. Shitty heart.